So as you can see from this slide, I'm going to be talking about a project today that was actually funded by the Bureau of Indian Affairs through their Tribal Resilience program, as well as the Alaska CASC did a bunch of in-kind kind of donation. And one of the most important things is from this slide is that I'm a very small part of a very large team. Linda Chase is our tribal liaison at the Alaska CASC, or the Climate Adaptation Science Center. She and I kind of came up with the original idea for the project, and we had been wanting to work together, and I have done a lot of kind of participatory research throughout my years, through my PhD, and then when we moved up into Alaska, a lot of that's been with tribal communities. And so for me, I don't know, I kind of feel like each project is kind of an evolution of what worked well in the last project and what did not, and then what I kind of wanted to do. And Jeremy Littell also joined our team very early and became a very essential part of that. Nathan Kettle is up at University of Alaska Fairbanks with ACAP, the Alaska Center for Climate Assessment Policy. And then we have our Krista Haringa has joined the CASC to help with tribal engagement, and Melinda, and then Molly and Mike are our communication staffs. But the most important part of this project team were a lot of the community partners and team members we worked with. And so they are all listed there. There was a lot of them and many more involved in the project. And I'll kind of talk about their involvement and how they directed the project and what we ended up going on to do with them. And basically what I chose to kind of focus on today is some of the data that we got from the project, some of the data that we kind of made for the project or put together, and then how we kind of engaged with these communities and what were some of the successes and challenges with that. And yeah, again, so we were talking a little bit about how this plays into some of the planning efforts at the community level with Alaska Native or rural communities. Again, how we can combine some of their community knowledge and their local indigenous knowledge with kind of the latest and greatest climate science that's out there, and some of the tools that have been developed by some of our university partners. And then finally, one of the keys of, and this is very much kind of a co-production framework, and I think this is going to become kind of part of that co-production framework, but Nathan Kettle provided an evaluation of the product by the participants kind of throughout the project. And so as kind of the leads of what we were going to do with this project and what we were going to develop, we had a lot of opportunities for the participants to kind of say, hey, this was great, this part was great, that part was not so great. I was falling asleep after lunch and all those kind of things. So we'll talk about that. And to kind of set up the context here, you know, for these communities, the adaptation planning, you know, the slide says it well, and a lot of these slides are actually from Melinda Chase and Jeremy and all these guys. But adaptation planning at the community level can be really overwhelming because there's a lot of things going on, and frankly, climate is just one of those things, right? They can be dealing with all different demands on their time and turnover, getting the communities engaged, documenting knowledge within the community. And there's a certain kind of base level of adaptation that is going on within the community, right? And so people are figuring out ways to, dry their fish in the kind of warmer, wetter, hotter summers, and the bugs that come with that. They're trying to figure out what to do with the houses in their communities that are being, threatened by either riverine or coastal erosion, and moving them one at a time or 10 at a time. And so there obviously I think this group has a good idea of what's going on out in the villages, and we'll talk a little bit more about that more. And so to try to think forward and not dealing with the immediate issues can be a bit of a stretch at points. And in Alaskan tribal communities, adaptation to climate change is happening in this kind of dynamic context of an indigenous worldview, where their livelihood and culture and ongoing, extractive development, colonization, active innovation, like I was just talking about, and revitalization efforts to, help with the community. The complex governments, you have these, what most people would refer to as small villages, but there's oftentimes 3 or 4 different governance systems within a village that are all doing different things and interacting with each other. And so it's a really big challenge. And Alaska Natives obviously have been adapting for millennia in these environments. Alaska in general is an active landscape, right? That goes through a lot of changes, but with climate change, we're seeing a lot of challenges brought on by just how rapidly it's happening here. And so that's definitely unique and not necessarily new to Alaska, but ongoing. And so we were lucky enough to partner with the 5 communities on this slide right here: Kotlik, St. Michael, Kwagilungak, Quinnahuck, and Iliamna. And it was great. We had a little bit of trouble getting outreach. We were originally hoping for some interior communities and some coastal communities, and then gonna kind of look at the comparisons and the challenges between those 2 different sets of communities, 2 different kind of types of communities. But we ended up doing an application process and really relying on some of the tribal organizations, such as Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, and some other organizations, to kind of get the word out that we had this project and that we were looking to work with communities. And so we had an application process, and I'll come back to this a little bit later, but going back to those, multiple levels of governance in a village, and this is kind of one thing that I learned throughout my experience in Alaska villages. When I would partner with communities or villages, I would often just be partnering with one person oftentimes, and then we'd, really heavily rely kind of on that person to introduce us to the rest of the community and make connections there. And so Melinda she's the lands manager for her tribe. She's from Anvik. And so, she was very familiar with these multiple layers of governance and was came up with a great idea. Well, let's try to get multiple, people from the corporation, from the tribal government, from the city government, all as part of one team, so we can kind of talk to them together and understand what's going on in the community and how it's responding to climate change. And so the team was kind of self-selected by the community. They applied, and then we kind of selected the applications. We had a limited amount of funding, and so we kind of narrowed it down to these 5 communities that had kind of done the most with terms of community planning around climate change and those things, and we were off. And as you can tell from the project title, and we kind of leaned on that project title pretty heavily throughout the project, looking forward, Jeremy was essential in helping kind of corral the SNAP data and get it into workable. And I'll show you some examples of that. But really, like, talking about what's going on in those projections with the communities, and what they thought that was going to mean for their community, and how it might impact some of their activities and infrastructure and those types of things. Looking back, it was this was probably my, I guess, well, anyway, we all worked on things together, but I'm very interested in kind of participatory methodologies. And so we had developed a couple different exercises that I'll get into here, but really trying to get an understanding from the community about the changes that they've experienced over their lifetime. And so you know, we were obviously talking to a wide variety of ages, and so we got, you know, up to, you know, 1 decade to, you know, several decades of information about the changes they'd experienced and what that meant for, you know, weather and infrastructure and climate in general, and a lot of different things. And then one of the other key parts of it was trying to build capacity in these communities and exposing them to some of the adaptation tools that exist out there. And so we worked with SNAP from UAF, the scenarios for networks for Arctic and Alaska planning, I believe. And they've developed a lot of really great tools that can be used at the community level, and you can get a lot of really interesting information from those tools. And you know, actually before we go there, so the way we always frame this project is that we really wanted to, you know, build capacity in the communities. We really wanted to help them document their knowledge so that it could be used, and then expose them to these projections, again, so they could use these things for, you know, public comments, for other grants, and for community plans, actual community plans too. And so we'll show you how we worked on that with them. This diagram over here is kind of a schematic of the project as a whole. And so we started off with a training in Fairbanks. Then we had a webinar kind of series that people would call into, and we did different presentations. And this is, sorry, this is kind of a little bit of an older diagram. Then we had, Jeremy, Melinda, and I went out to each one of these communities and spent 2 to 3 days in each one, and had, again, a bunch of different community events and meetings to talk with people. And then we had kind of another wrap-up training in Fairbanks. And then we had multiple opportunities for the communities to, again, get together and kind of validate and, you know, look over the community data that we collected and make sure that they were comfortable with it, and that it's something that they wanted to share and all that. And so it's been pretty exciting that this whole project took about, I guess, a little over 2 years, and we have finally kind of finished a lot of the community reports. And by finish, I mean going through all the different reviews. And then now we're starting to switch gears and think about some publications that might result from this. But once again, in terms of engaging with these communities, and Melinda was really great about, you know, explaining this and just kind of insisting on us kind of keep coming back to this way of thinking and the way of engagement, but really trying to have this holistic framing, right? And so relating climate impacts from the local to the global scale, you know, looking at what kind of adaptation actions are currently being taken and what might be taken. And this is kind of a nice diagram in the center here that talks about, you know, there's the individual, and then they're part of a community, which is part of a region, state, the Arctic, and the global. And so, you know, each one of those has a different level of impacts. And there's different ways to contribute to the adaptation action because of that, right? And again, kind of a key part of our project design was these community visits, where we went out and spent a couple days in each one of the communities. Met lots of people, you know, talked again to people from the city, people from the corporation, people from the tribal government. We did activities at the school. And, you know, it's really great. You know, sometimes, you know, there's too much going on, and people are, you know, don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking to people from the outside. But we got really lucky with this community. We're really great. The other kind of key component of our engagement was the free, prior, and informed consent. So, you know, everybody that we met with, we had forms that kind of explain the project and explain what we were trying to do, and said, you know, that even though we're the federal government, you don't have to talk to us, and all those kind of things. And so that's again just a really important piece of engagement to get out there and, you know, realize, make sure people know they don't have to share anything that they don't want to share with you. all those types of things. And then finally, really making the extra effort and getting the community to review the data or the information that you collect from the community, making sure they're okay with sharing it or not, and making sure that the notes you took and what you wrote down sounded right and sounded good and was said by people. This is a great slide from Jeremy, and just again, focuses on the just the rate of climate change that's happening in, or more correctly, temperature change that's happening throughout the state of Alaska. And these are our climate divisions in the state. And so you can see it's a little bit heterogeneous, but all of it kind of, a lot of it hovers right around that 2 times the global rate. But as he says there, some parts are Alaska. And for this project, again, we were focusing kind of on the Western Alaska LCC range. So most of our villages were in the YK Delta, and then we had Iliamna over here that participated as well. And this is an example of one of the participatory exercises we did. And so we printed out, big maps of the area and asked people to kind of identify their area of interest, so their traditional use area. And so we got a lot of these amazing hand-drawn maps with, where they did certain things, where they did certain activities, places they go. This is Kotlik right here. Kotlik is right around here, and St. Michael is right up here. And then we essentially kind of digitized these maps into a footprint, and that footprint was what Jeremy then used to, again, kind of corral the climate data available through the IAM model and that. And so on the left here are all the kind of traditional use areas that were identified. So again, these are the footprints that were derived from those beautiful maps that were created at the community during the community visits. And then Jeremy was able to take those footprints and essentially summarize the climate information for the area so that it became very poignant and very of interest to the folks in that place. And then he was able to talk about how that the projections and scenarios and how those all different. And so this is a change in the temperature projection, and it's the temperature change relative to 1970 to 1999. So that was an era that was very much of relevance to the community and the people that we were talking to. And so we got those traditional use areas, and then we also had community meetings and asked people about different changes that they had seen through their lifetime. And what the data that I'm going to present here, just for simplicity's sake, is from Kotlik, which is again in kind of the northern part of the Yukon Delta. And yeah, again, we just got a lot of great information from the community members. There's a lot of concern with ice travel, especially in the fall with shoulder seasons, the fall and the spring. The ice was not as thick. We used to go to St. Michael and Stebbins on the ocean ice, and now we use land routes. And so one of the neat things that came out of this project is that, we can see what, Jeremy's information is telling us about some of the projected changes. And that's really interesting. And as scientists and Western folks, there's a certain, we're, interested in those numbers and how those changes occur. But when you pair those numbers with some of these, observations, I mean, it just paints the picture much more easily. So it's great for science communication. It's great to communicate the impacts that these communities are having and dealing with and trying to adapt to. Again, the travel is a big part of some of the changing conditions that people are dealing with, and you know, unfortunately, a lot of these communities lose folks by open water in springtime. They're going along on their snow machine, and you know, they fall in, and so that's a big area of concern. They, you know, they also do a lot of subsistence fishing during the wintertime as well, and that has it. This is talking about this is a map from Neil Pastic about the current probability of permafrost over here. And so you can see it's a fairly, we're in the discontinuous zone of permafrost here. And it's very much changing. And when we look at the ground temperatures, which is essentially, you know, how permafrost is defined, right? It's defined by 2 years of ground temperature below 0 degrees Celsius. We see there's some big changes expected for this area. And I have actually, with the Yukon River Intertribal Watershed Council and some other folks at USGS, we've been looking at active layer declines, specifically in Kotlik, for the last 10 years now. And it's very dramatic of what's going on there in that 10-year period. The active layer is deepening quite a bit. And so we talked to, you know, again, people in the communities where they're telling us, well, I have to jack up my house 4 times a year now. The buildings are shaking from airplanes and vehicles. The ground is sinking. In Kotlik, you know, we saw all this heavy equipment that was, not all of this, but some heavy equipment that was just sinking into the tundra behind the school, and is, you know, therefore it's not, you can't use it anymore. And so there's lots of changes, lots of erosion, both riverine and coastal in these communities. And, you know, it's important for these communities to document that, and then they can use that information again in kind of grant applications and public comments and community planning in general. And it's a really nice pairing of, you know, that local community knowledge and the Western science knowledge. This is a subsistence calendar we did with each of these communities. We did a current and a past, and you know, talking about how subsistence activities have changed over time, what seasons they're in, and so, you know, if those if those activities are taking place again in the shoulder seasons, you know, there's a vulnerability associated with that, and even in the wintertime now, there can be vulnerability associated with that. And again, just getting a lot of great information about, you know, fish runs and the summer chums and the kings and how they all usually come in, and how that's changed. You know, water temps being really high and having fish kills. All about plants, you know, blooming in November because it got warm, and then, you know, they died shortly after that. You know, difference in subsistent resources. So the fish had pus and more parasites. So again, a lot of, you know, really great information there. And so the idea again is to pair this local and indigenous knowledge with climate science to, you know, be able to make effective public comments or grant applications or community planning. You know, documenting those impacts related to changing climate for communities and decision makers. As I mentioned, improving science communication, really, you know, painting a picture of what those parameters, the change in parameters look like, right? You know, what does 3 degrees Celsius look like, and how is that impacting these communities? Oh, it's impacting their infrastructure because it's sinking into the ground, or they're having trouble with flooding now because the you know, the ocean isn't frozen over anymore. They're having more trouble with flooding. And then finally, you know, you can really, if you are systematic about it, you can use that knowledge to validate some of the climate science products, remote sensing and modeling. And as we'll try to run through these last couple of slides, but as I mentioned, we had an evaluation process that kind of took place throughout the project that Nathan Kettle spearheaded, and he asked all the folks in this picture, besides Jeremy and Tom, Linda, and I. And so again, people were really excited to have multiple levels of governance involved in the planning and the education essentially that we provided. you know, a lot of these communities were really excited to have people like Jeremy come out and talk about, you know, what has gone on in the last several decades and what the scientists think is going to happen, and they're really interested in interacting with that and telling them if they thought he was right or not, and all those kind of good things. Again, Jeremy's a great communicator, and he can put that information in that holistic framing, and so it was neat to see those discussions and to take notes during them. A lot of information come out. You know, to again have the Western science, you know, again, these folks, you know, they know what's happening there, and they're trying to deal with it. To see the Western science kind of, you know, back up what they've observed and what they're dealing with. A lot of the participants were really pretty stoked on that, and seeing that pairing of the knowledges put together. And then, you know, another part that we learned a lot is we actually focused on colonization and trauma within these communities. And we had some Alaska Native faculty from UAF present on that, Lauren Dementieff, and some other folks that just spoke to those issues, and just the acknowledgement of that. And I think it really went a long way. I think it was very important for some of our participants to hear about that, and to know that we're cognizant of those types of things, and the history of what's happened between our nations. And so I think the acknowledgement of that was really helpful. And we also had ILOCA, the Exchange for Local Observations of Knowledge in Arctic, that presented some really neat community atlases. Katie Spellman in this picture here from UAF is a just wonderful research scientist and educator. And then again, we worked with the computer work on the variety of tools. We have these, and I think if we can't share them right now, we can share them very soon. This is just the table of contents of some of the trainings that we did do. We made these very nice reports with our communications folks, which were other kind of essential team partners, and getting this information out and designing it so it could be interactive and engaging with the tribal participants. This is the training 2. Again, it was quite the, just we talked about a lot of different things and tried to hit it in different ways and new ways. And I think it was, based on the evaluation, it was received very, very well. So that was really exciting to see. Although we did have, times where we redirected according to what, people wanted to learn more about and those types of things. And then at the end, each community, not only did they receive kind of reports of the trainings, so they could go back and rehash some of that material, but they also got our community report. And so we were kind of looking at, clips of that report with the Indigenous knowledge, and then some of the climate products that, again, Jeremy had put together for them. And so it was really exciting that, part of our work has made some additions to COTLIC. Was already working on a tribal resilience assessment. And so some of this that we did on this project is now within that assessment. So that was really exciting to see. We had some of the other communities write grant applications based on some of the work that we did with them. It's in general, going into community planning. And then, as I mentioned, as kind of researchers, we're thinking about some of the journal articles that might come out of this. And there's a great, I'm going to say, a movement of Alaska Native folks here, and really there's a lot of effort in making sure that they are part of the process, the research process, and have a say in how things go. And so we think that this project, while it was definitely not perfect in any way, has a lot of great things to share with folks, both about the information that we learned from the communities, but also about how we kind of interacted with the communities. And that this project has evolved. Melinda Chase has kind of, again, taken a lot of the lessons learned from this project and the ideas that were kind of generated, and is working now with Krista Haringa and to a lesser extent Jeremy and I and some other folks for this Alaska Tribal Resilience Learning Network. And so they have basically this whole structure that is going to have a number of different information sessions and learning sessions. And then you can get one-on-one coaching for grant development, learning network calls. So we'll have different people talking about different things. And what we're really hoping to do is also kind of increase that two-way communication, from the communities back to the CASC and other agencies and researchers. We really want to try to figure out some of the biggest needs from the communities that they're dealing with, and start to think about how we might be able to help with some of that. So I hope that wasn't too long, but as I mentioned, the BIA funded this project, and I'm happy to